Up to Whitestone. If you're just looking for a place.
Go ahead.
Whitestone.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to, at this time, call the meeting to order for James City County Wetlands Board. Mr. Wilson, you have an announcement you'd like to make, please, before we get started.
Yes, sir. For those on the board, you already know this, and for members in the audience and listening at home, on October 30th, this past month, we did lose a long-time board member, Mr. John Hughes, and I would just like to dedicate this meeting to his honor.
Vote on that, sir, to get it in the minutes?
If you'd like to,
yes, I'd like to have a motion and we'll have a vote. I'd like to make a motion that this meeting be dedicated to the memory of Mr. John Hughes. Call a roll, please.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. At this time, the responsibility of this wetland board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to preserve the wetlands and to accommodate economic activity so as to prevent their desertification. Roll call, please, Ms. Pearman.
Here. Here.
Here. Here.
Here.
Any problems with the minutes? Anyone? Corrections, additions? Moving on, the next item of business here will be the 2021 calendar. Mr. Wilson, do you have anything to add to the calendar, or should we go on with election of officers?
There are no conflicts with the second Wednesday of each month in 2021.
At this time, we'll open up for election of officers, and I think the way this is done, we ask for a nomination from the floor.
I'd like to nominate Mr. Apperson to be our chairman again.
Any other nominations? Call for a vote, please.
Mr. Ridley?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
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 This time for the position of vice chair, I'd like to nominate Mr. Gussman.
If I would prefer the you nominate Mr. Dunn.
Mistake. How do you feel about that?
Honored.
All right. We have a nomination for Mr. Dunn. Does have any more nominations, please? If not, Ms. Pearman, will you call the roll?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
I think the secretary is already filled, right, Mr. Wilson?
Need an official every year.
All right. At this time,
So if you want to nominate me again, I'd be honored.
We will elect the secretary to the Wetlands and Chesapeake Bay Board. Nominations?
Wilson?
Wilson, do you accept?
I do.
Ms. Pearman, you call the roll, please?
Yes.
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 And also, can we have a motion to adopt the 2021 calendar?
I make a motion to adopt the 2021 calendar.
Yes.
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 Matters of special privilege. Does anyone have anything they want to bring up? Mr. Wilson, do you have anything you want to bring up? According to my itinerary, we're finished with the Wetlands Board meeting. We'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Motion, meeting adjourned.
Okay. I'd like to call to order the November 12th meeting of the James City County Chesapeake Bay Board. The responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to protect against and minimize pollution and deposition of sediment in wetlands, streams, and lakes in James City County, which are tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay. Ms. Parman, will you call the roll, please?
Here.
Mr. O'Brien?
Here.
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 Our next order of business are the minutes from the October 14th meeting. Are there any changes, additions, deletions, corrections to the minutes? The minutes stand as approved. Our next order of business are public hearings. Our agenda shows the first case being CBPA-20-0092 for 4041 Bradshaw Ordinary. Mr. Wilson.
Mr. Chair, this application has been pulled by staff and is no longer requires a public hearing.
Okay, thank you. Our second case, Next case is CBPA 20-0096 for 289 Millstream Way.
Afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Trevor Long, Watershed Planner, here to present CBPA 20-0096. Mr. Aaron Williams of Williams Landscape and Design has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. Kevin and Ms. Tammy Potter for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a patio, 3 retaining walls, and steps with paver landings on property located at 289 Millstream Way within the Mill Creek watershed. The parcel was platted in 1995 prior to the 2004 changes in the ordinance. Total lot size of this property is 0.40 acres, of which 83% is located within the RPA. In June of 2020, the applicants obtained an administrative exception to convert a deck into a house addition. The applicants are now proposing to construct a patio under and adjacent to the addition. Patio area will be bordered by 2 retaining walls due to the natural slope of the property. In addition to the patio, the applicants have also proposed a series of steps, including paver landing areas connecting the patio, driveway, and rear yard. There is also an additional 75 linear foot serpentine retaining wall proposed to the rear of the house addition. The total area of the patio, 3 retaining walls, landings, and step structures equates to approximately 830 square feet of new impervious surface. Within this amount of impervious area, approximately 440 square feet are proposed to be constructed with pervious pavers. This application was deferred at the October 14th, 2020 meeting so that some adjustments could be made to the plan. The serpentine retaining wall has been moved away from the existing trees, and pervious pavers have been added to the landings, allowing for some infiltration to occur within these areas. In addition, the mitigation plantings have increased by 3 canopy trees, 6 understory trees, and 11 shrubs. Staff recommends that the extra fill between the serpentine wall and the stream channel be removed and this disturbed area be revegetated in shrubs and ground cover. Staff also recommends that the turf love program be implemented for the property. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the proposed construction of a patio with steps and landings, 3 retaining walls, and fill, and the application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the walls and patios are considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23, Chesapeake Bay Preservation, of the James City County Code to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and that reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff's view of this application is that it meets all 5 of the conditions as presented above. Should the board also find the exception request meets all 5 of the conditions above, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project, including an erosion sediment control plan, a land disturbing permit, and a building permit. The turf love program be implemented for the property. The mitigation plan plantings shall consist of 3 canopy trees, 6 understory trees, and 11 shrubs per the submitted plan. The serpentine retaining wall shall be no closer than 10 feet to the existing trees. On all recently placed fill between the wall and stream channel be removed, and this disturbed area be stabilized with additional shrubs and ground cover. That the permeable paver walkways and landings shall be built to the DEQ Stormwater Design Specification number 7 for permeable pavement, current version, and shall encompass at least 400 square feet of surface area. That a surety of $1,500 be paid and in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office. And that this exception request approval become null and void if construction has not begun by November 12, 2021. With written requests for an extension to this exception be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than October 1, 2021, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date of this permit. Now, divert your attention to the screen for a brief presentation. Again, this is CBPA 20-0096 for Mr. Kevin and Tammy Potter at 289 Millstream Way. And the applicants are proposing to construct a patio with 3 retaining walls and steps with landings. I've seen a map above showing the parcel here in blue, again, within the Mill Creek watershed. Aerial photograph of the parcel in question and the approximate location of the project. The topography showing a slope down towards the resource in the rear of the property. The resource protection area as it affects this lot. This is the October 14th, 2020 site plan that was heard before the board in the previous month, showing the proposed retaining walls, landings, and the 100-foot buffer as it affects this property. Here in red is the existing deck, do not include the impervious area, and the approximate edge of the wetland and stream. This is the most current version of the site plan that has been submitted. The proposed retaining wall, serpentine wall, has been pulled forward, and the other 2 walls surrounding this paver area here, with infiltration in front of the new serpentine wall. The proposed landings and paver area. The 100-foot resource protection area as it affects this property. The edge of the wetlands here in green. And the approximate center of the stream here in blue. Additionally, the yellow area would be impervious area. And the orange overlaid on top is areas that have been proposed to be constructed with pervious pavers. There's also conservation easement in the rear of this property. Mitigation plan has been submitted. The green areas are the new plantings. Some site photos. The paver area would go adjacent and behind this driveway area, and the steps and landings to the right. The area of the approximate serpentine wall and patio and landing area. This is the existing deck conversion. And again, the retaining wall somewhere within this area where the slope begins to slough off. Good. Again, should the board wish to approve this project, all other necessary local, state, and federal permits shall be required. The enrollment of turf love shall be also required, and a mitigation plan of 3 canopy trees, 6 understory trees, and 11 shrubs be planted as it has been submitted. That a surety of $1,500 be paid in place prior to the commencement of work. And the serpentine retaining wall be no closer than 10 feet to the existing trees, with all fill recently placed between the wall and the stream to be removed and stabilized. This area should be re-stabilized with additional shrubs as ground cover. And that the permeable paver walkways and landings be built to the DEQ standard of specification number 9 and shall encompass at least 400 square feet of the impervious surface. And this exception request become null and void if construction is not begun by November 12th, 2021, with written requests for an extension submitted no later than October 1, 2021. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer your questions the board may have.
I'm going to start off with the first question. You didn't have a slide that showed where the proposed wall was that was presented to us last month, and where the new one is for this month. Can you pull up a slide and so we can see that? And how much was the wall pulled back from last month, from what we looked at our last meeting?
Yes. So here would be the first submission of the site plan. The serpentine wall here in yellow. It got pulled forwards some here. By how much, I'm not entirely aware, but these would be the two
Okay,
site
well,
plans that were submitted.
All right, maybe when we have the public, go through the public hearing, I'd like to get that answered. Are we talking about 2 feet or, 10 feet or what?
Mr. Chair, that was one of the reasons we stipulated in the approval, should the board choose to approve, that the wall be no closer than 10 feet. We figured it's approximately 8 feet from the trees in the current configuration, so it must have been about 5 feet in the October meeting.
Wait, I didn't quite follow you there. So how many feet was it pulled back from what we looked at last month?
Last month, it's approximately 5 feet from the tree trunk,
Okay, it was 5 feet from the tree trunk, and we're pulling it back to what?
10 feet.
So, okay, so the wall's been pulled back 5 feet then,
Would that, yes,
on an average, approximately 5 feet back. Okay.
as it, in this area, around these two existing trees.
Mr. Gussman, I think it may vary slightly depending upon what section of the wall you're referring to. So I think Mike is putting a condition in their recommendation for approval that it be no closer than 5 feet, even though 10 feet, even though it may be a little bit closer than that in this design.
Okay, I was having trouble following that. Thank you.
It doesn't look like it was pulled back at all on the left-hand side of the retaining wall, but as you get to those trees on the right, that's where it got pulled back 5 feet. So it's not 5 feet across the board.
Okay. Are there questions from the other members of the board have questions for the staff?
I do, Mr. Chairman. Trevor, could you describe how the drainage flows through this property? Because I know that there was some concerns over overland sheet flow and erosion. And that's
Sure.
one of the reasons the walls are there, to help stem that erosion.
Certainly. All water on this property basically flows backwards. It's fairly flat towards the house, and as soon as you get to the rear of the property, it starts to slough pretty significantly. Right now, there's construction going on, so there has been disturbance due to the deck conversion. But as you can see in these photos here, basically anything running this way comes over the driveway or around the house. For that reason, there's some erosion issues going on directly adjacent to the driveway, and coming directly from the other side of the house, which is why the serpentine wall, as is my understanding, is why it's been proposed to take care of some of that erosion issues.
Thank you.
They brought in dirt, though.
That is correct. I believe that the majority of the dirt directly behind this addition was fill brought in, but the applicant can correct me if I'm wrong. Evidently, there was never any brought in.
You'll have time
Yep.
when the public hearing is open.
Any other questions for the staff? I believe the public hearing is open, right? I don't have to reopen it?
That's correct.
Okay, so I can ask for, would anyone like to come forward and speak on this issue? The applicant, would you like to come forward and talk about the changes?
Hi, I'm Kevin Potter. I'm the owner of the property. So we've also got Greg from Williams Landscaping here with us to about the details. But the question about the dirt, there was no dirt brought in at all. The dirt that was on top back there was from the excavating, converting the deck that was already there. We had to put in a foundation and stuff and footings. And so some dirt had to be dug out from the back of the house where the deck was. And so that was, kind of spread out to whatever, for whatever reason, to make it available, and so water wouldn't back up into our house. So it was just kind of put back there with the intent to use that behind the retaining wall if we could get that approved. I do have a question too about the plan. We want to add actually another deck that's over the paving area that's shown out past the back of the house. I don't know if that's actually included here, or if my understanding is it's on the drawing, but it wasn't mentioned. And I'm not sure what the process is for that, but it would be over the patio area that's shown beyond the current house.
Is a deck part of this exception request?
I just wanted to see if that was included, because that was our plan with Williams Landscape.
The deck that Mr. Potter speaks of is shown on the plan, but was never called out as being included. That's to my knowledge.
That you're referring to this area.
Right over the pavers.
So over top of these pavers would be a deck. We counted the impervious surface associated with the pavers underneath of it.
Wait, there's going to be an impervious surface over the pavers?
Yes, sir.
So, I guess.
And that is counted in the impervious total.
Oh. So, so you're not going to have any water coming down onto them to percolate in, right? The water's going to flow off to the side.
That would be correct.
Okay.
Mr. Potter, there were concerns with the proposal last month, in part because of the amount of disturbance and encroachment of the RPA. And you understand that this board's charge is to help maintain that 100-foot buffer to the maximum extent practical. And there are conditions that we have to follow in order to evaluate that. And, when I went out for a site visit with Mr. Wilson and Trevor, your wetland line is not too far beyond that silt fence line that you have out there right now. So once the wall is built, there's going to be a very narrow band of fast land before you get to the wetlands. So from my standpoint, I'd like to hear from your architect regarding how the infiltration is being treated, because when this is done, if the fix, if you will, the retaining wall does act as a filter for that runoff to not only avoid erosion but also contain and treat it, then it is somewhat replacing the natural effect of a 100-foot buffer. So I'm trying to get to that level of understanding, because right now this looks like 10 pounds of potato in a 5-pound sack. I mean, we're putting a lot into that RPA buffer.
Have our Greg from Williams Landscaping come up and give you some details on that.
Good evening. Glad to answer any questions that I can.
Could you just state your name and?
My name is Greg Wetzel. I work with Williams Landscape and Design.
Greg, could you describe the infiltration that is proposed with the wall and how much of that area is being treated?
Well, the wall will be built with a stone chimney, as we would a typical retaining wall, with a collection pipe at the bottom of that chimney. And then that would be piped through the bottom of the wall and down to the bottom with a stone spreader. They've also added the river stone section on top of that to help filter that water as it gets down into it.
The impervious pavers are constructed with a sub-drain that would also run down with stone spreader discharge pipe.
So it's all going to that single discharge point?
Well, they're probably not the same spot. We would probably run the sub-drain all the way across and maybe down toward the left corner as I'm looking at it. Another thing, I don't know if it's spelled out, but there's some existing stone on the right side that's not really working well, and that's slated to be reworked to provide a better swell filtration system for any water that's running down the side of the property line. The wall itself.
Are you speaking about the plunge pool for the existing stormwater outfall that's down at the bottom? There's a granite rock plunge pool at that outlet structure?
Right, and that would help filter that water down the side. That's going to be redone to.
So you're going to be directing that water into that as opposed to directing it to the retaining wall?
Yes, that's correct. That's my understanding.
That's your question, sir. Trevor, could we have the slide back up there that shows the tree and the proposed wall right now? Back, the other one, one too many, I think, Mr. Wilson. Yeah, I assume the trees that you're talking about, the 10-foot, would be these trees here. How much dirt, since you're doing the work, I want to ask you this question. How much fill are you going to have to move now to get back to the 10-foot from the trees? Well, actually, dirt will actually be pulled out of there. It looks to me like there's a considerable amount of soil that's going to have to be taken back out to get the 10-foot distance back from the trees.
Where that soil has been leveled off from the excavate underneath the deck, that top portion will be rounded off just a little bit, and then from the 10 feet from the tree, we would go down approximately 2 blocks, I would suspect, so plus about 8 inches a footer, so you're talking about 18 inches of excavation for the wall footer, if that's what you're asking me.
Not. What I'm asking is, it looks to me like there's enough soil around the base of this tree now for it to be lethal to this plant. Based on what little bit I can see here from the slide, it actually looks like you pulled some soil away from the base of the tree.
Well, it certainly looks like it. I have not physically been to the site at this point and seen this. I'm seeing the same thing you are from a slide. So it's a little bit hard to tell, but one of the things that the intent was to maintain that natural slope and obviously keep any excess soil that's been moved from the excavation off of the tree roots.
And go back to original grade.
And go back to original,
10 foot from the trees back, 10-foot original grade to the wall.
We would absolutely want to.
That answers my question. That's
recover the original grade.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? Please come forward, state your name for the record.
Hi, my name's Tammy Potter. And I just want you to consider, if you will, the deck that we're building, that we're planning to build. When we added on to the house where the deck was, we actually only added partially, so the deck was actually bigger than where the addition is. So this deck that we're wanting to add is just kind of like a small deck so that we can have an exit from that floor of our house, because without it, we won't have like an outside exit. So that's why we want that small deck, just so that we can have a place to put like our grill and have an exit. I think as far as all this trees and everything, our biggest concern was, trying to get somebody to help us, to get all of this moved back. The trees of great concern to me. So If that would be, I would greatly appreciate it, so.
Thank you.
So one other just point on the decks you was talking about. So the original deck went back an additional 4 feet from where the edge of the house goes now, just so you'll know. And so we're asking for maybe putting an 8-foot deck there. So we're asking for 4 more feet from where the original deck.
Okay, thank you.
Just to be clear. Is there any more questions for me or?
Nope, I don't believe so. Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? At this time, I will close the public hearing and open it up for discussion from the board. And I'm going to start off by, I have a question for the staff, and we may need both of you guys for this one. There's a lot of problems on this site. I feel there are. If we don't approve this, I'm not sure, I don't want the site left where it is. What would, if it should not be approved by the board, what would be the next step to make sure that the site is restored? How would that work? In the event, I don't know how we're going to vote or what's going to go on, but I want to know what our alternatives if we don't approve this are.
If this application is not approved by the board, the disturbed area would be regraded so it drains properly, and the backyard probably matted to reduce the threat of erosion and stabilized. Probably with a fescue, and that would be all we could enforce at this time. The work that has been done was done legally with the addition that you see in this.
So it would be stabilized with a fescue, and the idea, and then you don't touch it. And the natural, and you just let the natural vegetation come back and reestablish itself.
The slope would be fairly steep to, at least for myself, would want to maintain with a mower. So it would most likely go back to native.
But it's a steep slope, but I've hiked up and down a lot of natural slopes that work perfectly well that are steeper than this, right?
Yeah.
We don't have any pictures of what it looked like before all this work started. There's no evidence that this was like a severely eroding slope before, all this construction started. I look at the neighbors' yards, and some of them, have natural vegetation. They don't appear to be eroding.
I would agree with you.
Okay. Other questions from the board?
Mr. Wilson, on the issue of how stormwater flows through the site, if you could go to the site plan. Understood Greg's comment, but it doesn't appear to me that the water flowing down the right-hand side of the property is going to be diverted into that plunge pool. It appears that it's going to follow the grade to the proposed grassy area behind the wall.
That was my understanding. I think, and I would allow Greg to speak up if I misspeak, but I think he was talking about a dry river bed here, and not the outlet protection from the stormwater system that you and I saw in the wetland system.
And the reason to me that's important is because we end up treating more of the property with the wall, with the infiltration system that they're proposing. Even though I know it's structural for both aesthetic reasons, it also performs an infiltration function. And I appreciate the applicant pulling the wall back. I didn't realize that in comparing the applications that they had adjusted. So I do appreciate that effort to try and minimize the encroachment.
So I'm a little slow here, but just to be clear, if the water is coming from that impervious surface on the right, which I assume is the driveway? Or what is,
Driveway is to the
that's just
left.
grass here?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so,
The driveway is over
okay,
here, O'Brien.
okay, but on the right-hand side,
The
that's,
front yard does slope to the right and down. And that is currently either grass or disturbed.
so the water flow in that area either moves towards the retaining wall or goes around it on the right?
Correct.
Mr. Wilson, will you put up the photograph, or I want to look again, or it could be, I want to see, where is the stream in relationship to all this?
It is approximately 2 to 3 feet to the left of the silt fence shown in this photograph.
I want to remind the board, some of you weren't here last month. We're not talking about a huge RPA here. We're talking about that's the stream. It's not the edge of the RPA. That's the water body that's going to be impacted. There is not a lot of room on that slope to achieve treatment, and it's not like there's going to be a lot of grass or a lot of vegetation to intercept that flow and treat it. I feel that this project is going to have an impact on water quality, and I also believe it was self-created. So I'm just stating I have a lot of trouble approving this project. I appreciate it; it's better, but I don't think it's good enough. I think we're going to still have issues with water quality, and as I said last month, it's not just the James and the York, but these little streams that we're supposed to protect. And when there's a heavy rainfall, I think there's going to be chemicals running off. There's going to be a lot of water hitting it pretty quickly. I don't think it can be adequately protected with this project. That's my 2 cents.
I've listened to everything and looked at this hard, and quite frankly, I don't think that the fix is going to work, trying to naturally stabilize it. I think it's going to wash, especially if it's this close to the stream. I think the retaining wall is going to be an ultimate answer to keep the silt from going into the stream. The slope is steep, it's bare, it's going to wash, and it's going to continue to wash. Years from now, it's still going to be washing. I would prefer to vote right now for the retaining wall, but I would rather vote for the wall to be moved back further yet from the stream. That's my position. I'm leery of the fact that this slope is going to be stabilized and not put sediment into the water.
The applicant or his agent, was any calculations done on water quality from a stormwater perspective? Because part of the balancing act here is both quantity and quality. And, infiltration can serve a quality function as well as minimizing the quantity that's discharged at any given peak moment. We're talking a lot about erosion and sediment deposition, which carries the nutrients into the waterway. So that, the thinness of that natural area channelward of the wall is of concern, but I'm trying to understand if the wall and the infiltration is going to achieve the water quality piece of it as well. Oh, yeah.
I closed the public hearing on this. Do I have to reopen the public hearing?
Yes, please.
For them to make remarks? Okay. We never deny people a chance to speak. So at this time, I will reopen the public hearing once.
I
Okay.
just want to address a couple of things. One is that I know you've, suggested that maybe this was created by the construction. Obviously, there is some dirt that was moved. The reason why we called Williams Landscape was long before we ever did this addition. And that's because on both sides of our home, there has been significant erosion going on. We have tried to do things like, if you see the one picture, it was taken where there's like, kind of like where we tried to do some little step off area. We tried to do things to help with the erosion, but we just haven't been successful. And so we called Aaron, I think it's been a couple years ago, and or maybe a year and a half ago, and asked him to help us to create a plan so that we could take care of all this erosion problems. And so I don't know that there's been any kind of study done as far as the water, but I thought that him putting all the rock and things and all of the water from the one side, it does flow around there and will flow into that like grassy area. The other part, which I think he hasn't actually been to the site, so I'm not even sure if he's aware of the big I call it a holding pond thing for the neighborhood. This last summer when we had significant rain, a lot of erosion came down and into that stream, and it's concerning to us too. I mean, we live there and we like the stream. We like what it brings, to our community. So I think that's why we, asked him to come in and make us a plan, and we just hate to see this, like, there's just no way. It did used to at one point have some grass, but it's not really mowable, and the regular vegetation, it didn't stop it from eroding. It is pretty steep. So it's just like over time, it just wears out, and we get these big gullies of, washed out dirt. So I think that it will really help if we can have, something to help us.
Potter again. I just wanted to, somebody was asking about on the right side with the rock, I don't know what you call it. If it's better, we can make the water go to that rock drain instead of going to the backyard from the front, if that helps.
Well, it actually didn't from my perspective, because I think
Or
you're
we can
getting
send it
more
to the back.
infiltration using your proposed retaining wall than
Yeah.
that rock conveyance.
And I think somebody asked earlier, I don't know if it ever got answered, the drain rocks in front of the retaining wall against the yard. I think that was going to be a couple of foot or 2.5. I don't remember exactly, but there was going to be a couple of 3 foot of rock there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? This time I'm closing the public hearing again. Mr. Wilson?
Just want to, for the record, clarify Mr. Roadley's question about whether design calculations were provided. They were not, sir. Staff did not ask for them.
Thank you.
I closed the public hearing, and I'm going. That's it. Mr. Apperson, you made some remarks about, a retaining wall would help stabilize the slope. It might, but, I look, there's other, some of the neighbors don't have retaining walls and they have a naturally vegetated slope and it does a perfectly good job. It takes, it's been really disturbed, and I'm not sure how much, it's not going to come back immediately. There's going to have to be work done to reestablish the native vegetation. But I think once the native vegetation comes back, the slope should be able to maintain itself.
I have no problem with what you're saying, sir. Looking at the picture, it looks to me like there's probably 18 inches of fill already against the silt fence. So I think the first thing that's going to have to be done there, in my way of looking at this, that's got to be removed and brought back up the hill. It's got to be prevented from going back down the hill. I don't know, Mr. Rodley may have a better idea than that, than what I'm coming up with, but it looks to me like, what's saving the stream right now is the silt fence.
Oh, most definitely, in an open construction site. Every time it rains, it flows into that silt fence. I go back to the applicant's comments there at the end with regard to the pre-existing erosion that was occurring and the rilling that apparently was happening. This is a good example of a home built prior to the regulations where it wasn't regulated, it was close to the resource, and there are inherent problems with that type of construction when you're that close. So it's a conundrum. This is a tough one.
It's tough for me.
I don't think I can vote for the existing plan. Mr. Rodley, I'll defer to your expertise. Do you think there's a better plan, or should it just be stabilized and try that?
I'm concerned that I'm not a big fan of the plan, but I am a fan of infiltration as a means to control stormwater runoff and get some level of treatment before it leaves the site. So from that standpoint, I'm just leaning towards being in favor of the application.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch. So you think a better plan could be developed?
I mean, they could potentially pull the wall back a little further, closer to the home, and achieve the same goal, the same infiltration goal that I'm looking for. The extent of patio pavers within the RPA is what it is, but they're going to be putting a wall over, is my understanding, at the base of the patio and infiltrate that water as well. But this is a push-pull with the size of the lot and the closeness to the resource. So I'm trying to come up with a recommendation for a plan that, I'm not designing it, but we're trying to minimize that encroachment so that we can get as much buffer treatment before it hits the RPA as possible.
So this is the second time it's been brought up.
It was presented to us last month. They came back with this plan.
The issue seems to be the runoff and the drainage, not so much the erosion. Was that concern expressed last time?
Yes.
I get a sense that there really wasn't much discussion other than remarks around the drainage. I would have expected to hear something a little bit more thorough in that area.
Any other comments from the board?
This one is tough. This property is wholly ill-suited for the type of developing that they want to do. Slope has been problem of trying to protect the water quality in that stream. The applicants had a deck that they chose to develop, and then now they're asking for additional encroachment down into the paver patio with a fire pit. It's accessory in nature. It makes it difficult because it doesn't look like the minimum necessary to afford relief.
What, Mr. Wilson, I just clarify one point. There was already an exception granted, right? And it was done administratively, right? The earlier, when was that done?
Yes, the administrative exception for the conversion of the previously existing deck to home addition was granted early summer, June of this year.
Administratively, right?
Correct.
Okay, all right, so there was already one exception granted for this property. Okay, does anyone want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to deny the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 20-0096 at 289 Millstream Way.
Okay, we have a motion to deny the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA-20-0096 at 289 Millstream Way. Anybody have any questions about the motion?
Don, is that because you feel that it is not the minimum necessary to afford relief for the proposed activity?
That's correct.
Thank you.
And I, you know, and as I stated earlier, I think it will have an impact on water quality. Okay. Ms. Parman, can we have a roll call, please?
And to be clear, a yes vote is to deny the application. Mr. Rodley?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien? Yes. Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
No.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Okay, the motion carries. Thank you for coming out. All right.
Chairman, at this time, I'd like to ask if I can be excused from the
Okay,
comment that I have to keep in.
sure.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Would you make sure the minutes reflect that Mr. Apperson had to leave the meeting, will not be voting on any additional cases? Our next case, CBPA 20-0102 for 233 Richard Brewster.
Afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Trevor Long, James City County Watershed Planner, here to present CBPA 20-0102. Mr. Chase Grogg of Land Tech Resources has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. Brian and Ms. Diane Magoon for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a deck and screened porch on property located at 233 Richard Brewster within the College Creek watershed. The parcel was platted in 1983 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. A Chesapeake Bay Preservation Area exception request was approved for this property at the May 9th, 2018 Chesapeake Bay Board regular meeting. The applicants are now proposing the construction of an 8-foot by 12-foot screened porch and an 8-foot by 12-foot attached deck. Total impacts associated with this construction are approximately 425 square feet of impact within the landward 50-foot RPA. There is existing impervious surface within this area, bringing the total impacts down to approximately 220 square feet of impact. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equates to the plantings of 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a deck and screened porch. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the deck and screened porch are considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to sections 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23, Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance of the James City County Code, to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from the conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to the adjacent parcels. And that reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff's view of this application is that the request does meet all 5 of the conditions presented above and is approvable. Should the board also find that the exception request meets all 5 of the conditions above, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into its approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, local permits as required for the project. A mitigation plan equating to the plantings of 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs be submitted to the James City County Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. That a surety of $500 be paid and in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office. And this exception request become null and void if construction is not begun by November 12th, 2021, with written request for an extension submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than October 1st, 2021, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date of this permit. Thank you. I'll have a brief presentation. Again, the applicant request is to construct a deck and screen porch on property located at 233 Richard Brewster within the Kings Mill subdivision, outlined here in blue. Aerial photography showing the parcel in question and the approximate location of the addition. Topography as it affects this property slopes downwards towards the rear of the property with the stream channel below the property line. Resource protection area for this property encompassing about half of the existing house. A site plan as it has been submitted. The proposed deck on the left side of this yellow area. The 100-foot resource protection area, the 50-foot, and the sunroom directly adjacent to the proposed deck. Some photos from the site. Again, there is some existing impervious here, and there's also a concrete V-ditch here, capturing water from the roof. And staff does recommend approval of this exception request, given that all other necessary local, state, and federal permits are acquired as they are needed. Then a mitigation plan of 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs be submitted with a surety of $500. Excuse me, that is a mistake on the screen. However, it should be $500 be submitted to the James City County Attorney's Office in a form acceptable to it. This exception request become null and void if construction is not begun by November 12th, 2021, with written request for an extension submitted no later than October 1st, 2021, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Any questions for staff? Okay, thank you. This time I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward and address the board?
Good evening, members of the board. Chase Grogg with Land Tech Resources, 7657 Turlington Road, Toano, Virginia. Trevor pretty much covered everything. There's just a couple things I wanted to point out. The Magoons are requesting this application because at the moment they don't have any existing outside seating area. If you actually go back one picture, Mike, you'll see that their grill is actually located on their driveway. And so they're requesting this so that they can have a screen porch with a deck, so they can actually enjoy some outside seating that doesn't, require a table on their driveway. As Trevor mentioned, it's, only an additional 220 square feet of impervious. You can see the existing sidewalk that will, be underneath what we're proposing, as well as there's an existing concrete gutter along the house that is existing impervious as well. I know Trevor mentioned as well, they'd previously gotten an exception for the retaining wall that was there. This is their only other planned project on their property. They're not trying to, come every year and keep piecemealing and adding. The retaining wall was added because they were having erosion issues behind the house. And so they were just trying to get that taken care of. We'll be doing the structural engineering for this as well to ensure that the footers will, work well with the retaining wall and not cause any further issues. Happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions?
Retaining wall help stem erosion?
Yep, no further issues. So thank you for that exception.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? At this time, I'll close the public hearing. Discussion from the board. It's certainly a lot easier to consider these when you don't have a stream 10 feet behind where all the work is going on, and you have it's going into the buffer a little bit, but it's not, it's not even within the 50 foot. So this is a lot easier case.
Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the Chesapeake Bay exception for Chesapeake Bay Board Case CBPA 20-0102 at 233 Richard Brewster.
Ms. Parman, can you call the roll, please?
Mr. Roadley? Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson? Oh, sorry, not here. Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. The exception's granted. Thanks for coming out, and looks like a good project. All right, we have one more case on the agenda, CBPA 20-0101 for 9230 Pocahontas Trail.
Evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Mike Wilson here, Senior Watershed Planner, to present case CBPA 20-0101 to Peninsula Pentecostals at 9230 Pocahontas Trail. Mr. Anthony Lobier of VHB has applied for Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of the Peninsula Pentecostals for encroachment into the RPA buffer for the construction of a sanitary sewer connection, connecting it to an existing gravity sanitary line on property located at 9230 Pocahontas Trail within the Skis Creek watershed. Property is further identified as James City County Tax Map Parcel 60101000006. Parcel was platted in 1986 after the enactment, or prior to the enactment of the Chesapeake Bay Ordinance. Total lot size for this property is 23.52 acres, of which 27% is located within the RPA. There is an existing gravity sanitary sewer on the western border of the property. The Peninsula Pentecostals Church intends to use this property for the construction of a worship hall and other future development, and is for this reason that the applicant is proposing the construction of a sanitary sewer connection. Approximately 2,850 square feet of disturbance is associated with the proposed sanitary sewer, and it obviously extends into both the landward and seaward 50-foot RPA buffer. Also associated with this proposal, but not before the board for consideration, is the construction of 2 BMP outfalls that equal approximately 3,417 square feet of impacts to the RPA. Those impacts are considered, for the BMPs, are considered water dependent and will be processed administratively. Furthermore, there's approximately 6,500 square feet of steep slope impacts associated with the construction of the worship hall. Mitigation requirements for the amount of impacts to the RPA typically equate to the planting of 7 canopy trees, 14 understory trees, and 21 shrubs. Due to the constraints associated with the site, staff does recommend a conservation easement be recorded in the amount of 5,700 square feet instead of the plantings to offset the impacts to water quality. Furthermore, the sanitary sewer easement and the 2 BMP outfall easements would be maintained. And so that was a further consideration for not replanting those areas. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the proposed construction of a sanitary sewer connection. This application does meet the ordinance conditions in sections 2314 and 2311 and should be heard before the board because the sanitary sewer is not a water dependent facility. The board may grant exceptions to 23.7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is a minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23 to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff's view of this application is that it does meet all 5 conditions as presented above and finds this exception request to be approvable. Should the board find that the exception request does meet all 5 of the conditions, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into that approval. The applicant obtain any other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. That a conservation easement equaling 5,700 square feet be recorded. Conservation easement shall be above and beyond what is required for stormwater compliance and may not be coincident with any forested areas claimed in the Virginia runoff reduction method. That this exception request approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by November 12, 2021, and a written request for an extension be submitted to our office no later than October 1, 2021. If I may direct you to your screens, the applicant request is the construction of a sanitary sewer connecting to an existing gravity main line. Project parcel is 9230 Pocahontas Trail, very close to Greenmount Parkway and the Walmart Distribution Center. Just to give you further clarification, the proposed J-hook flyover to 143 is occurring approximately in this area. This is the regional jail here. They will be tying, that road will be tying in here, will be going over top of the railroad track and intersecting with the Pocahontas Trail at the traffic light at Greenmount. None of that work, however, is part of this project. I just wanted to give you a little context. The property here, this parcel here is the Morningside Baptist Church. The gravity line that they're tying into runs along the western property line. That western property line is also a perennial stream and is where the RPA is derived from. The topography of the site, relatively flat in the upland farmed area, and then gently sloping towards the ravine, and then once you get into the bottom of the ravine, the slopes increase significantly. The RPA, as it does affect this site, again centered on the perennial stream and the wetlands surrounding that. From the site plan, this impact here is for the sanitary sewer. It will be going, and Mr. Lubier may correct me if I have this wrong, but it will be extended, and there's a further commercial property here that they will be tying that sanitary sewer into. This is one of the 2 BMP outfalls that I spoke of previously, and that would be an administrative approval when the time comes for that. From the site plan, their future expansion plans. Phase 1 is this worship hall and parking here. There's a BMP here. There's one here. And I believe there's one back here. Future expansion would be in this area and this area with further parking expansion here. And then here is the commercial area I was talking about that the sanitary sewer is going to be ultimately tying into. And then here is the road construction tying into the traffic light at Greenmount. And then this yellow area here is the proposed conservation easement that we have asked for, that is above and beyond the mandatory stormwater compliance that they must achieve on this site to develop as you see here. A couple pictures from the site, standing in the stream channel, looking up the slope towards the future worship hall. 180 degrees back, looking at the manhole structure here. You can see the stream is here. And from the approximate edge of the RPA looking down into the buffer. Staff does recommend approval with the following conditions: that they obtain any other necessary local, federal, state permits, that a conservation easement equaling 5,700 square feet be dedicated on this property. The exception request shall become null and void if construction is not begun by November 12, 2021, and written requests for extension be submitted to our office no later than October 1, 2021. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have regarding this application.
Any questions for staff? Yep, no questions, thank you. At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would anyone like to speak on this issue? Would the applicant like to speak?
Anthony Lubier with VHB. Two things I just wanted to note. The highlighted area for the proposed conservation easement, it wouldn't necessarily need to be the whole area. 5,700 square feet is only about a third of that area. That's just the general area where we want to place it. And the sanitary sewer crossing will be a jack and bore in order to avoid digging up the stream channel. And likely to set up the bore pit will be on flatter ground, so we'll probably end up with less seaward RPA disturbance than what's proposed.
How far do you have to go? Do you have to bore to, what's it, I'm just curious about.
We're estimating it's probably going to be a 60 to 70 foot bore.
Okay.
So the manhole is about 5 feet over the property line on the other side of the stream.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Thank you for coming out. At this time, I'll close. And would anyone else like to speak on this issue? At this time, I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion from the board?
Be hard to make water flow uphill.
My thoughts exactly. As long as we're going to put sewers in the under the creeks, we got to let people tie into them. Okay, can we have a motion?
Motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 20-0101.
Okay, we have a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception. Ms. Parman, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
And Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you for coming out. That concludes our public hearings for tonight. Our next order of business are board considerations, and our first item is a presentation from the Colonial Soil and Water Conservation District. And I'd like to give a warm welcome to these folks who perform a very similar role to us, or we have quite a little bit of overlap in our duties here.
Thank you, members of the board and distinguished guests. I'm Doug Hall. I'm one of 2 elected directors from James City County on the board for Colonial Soil and Water Conservation District. My more senior partner, Mr. Bob Lund, can't be with us tonight because he's recovering from heart surgery, and we wish and pray Bob a speedy recovery. With me tonight is Mr. Jim Wallace, our district manager,
Welcome.
and Ms. Robin Goad, our urban conservationist.
Welcome.
Between the 3 of us, if you have questions we can't answer, we will get back with you as soon as possible. As you may know, nationwide, the districts were created in response to the 1930s Dust Bowl environmental disaster. Within Virginia, we're a political subdivision of the Commonwealth, and there are 47 districts throughout the state. The Colonial District serves New Kent County, Charles City County, James City County, York County, and the city of Williamsburg, with 2 elected directors from each locality. We receive about 60% of our funding from the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. And pretty much all of our funding is obligated and tied to specific programs. Am I driving, Mike, or are you?
No, I will.
Okay. Okay, our programming. Districts are non-regulatory, non-enforcement, using voluntary incentive-based outreach. Basically the carrot versus the stick approach. Our current programming includes the Virginia Agricultural Cost Share Program, or VAX, Decision Agriculture and Precision Agriculture Program, the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act, the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program, and Turf Love. And opportunities for future programming that we're looking at are a new Shoreline Evaluation Program and an Equine Assessment and Conservation Program. Our agricultural programs, as I mentioned, VAX, provides technical and financial assistance for agricultural conservation practices. And over the past 5 years, we've spent about a little over $107,000 in James City County. Decision Agriculture and Precision Agriculture is a program funded by the Virginia Environmental Endowment and provides financial incentives for producers to adopt precision agriculture management techniques. Precision agriculture prevents plowing up the field in the winter to kill bugs or whatever. It's a more environmentally responsible way to farm. And in 2019, 437 acres were enrolled in James City County. Chesapeake Bay Act, which you guys are very familiar with, we support the county by conducting 20 assessments on agricultural land per year in an agreement with the county. And we also provide advice and support for agricultural conservation planning for any new operations. Next, the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program. The district provides technical advice and financial assistance to install and implement mainly small conservation practices. This includes permeable pavers, rain gardens, and living shorelines. In the last 4 years, VCAP's provided over $65,000 to James City County homeowners associations, and schools with matching funds by them of almost $42,000. VAX does provide an obligation to the applicant to maintain the conservation practice for 10 years and a burden on the district for a 10-year inspection cycle. Turf Love, which is Robin's pride and joy. Since February 2019, we've completed within James City County 158 certified nutrient management plans for private property owners. In addition, we've done 24 nutrient management plans for county properties. With support from the James City County Williamsburg Master Gardener Program, Turf Love teaches homeowners how to maintain their lawns in an environmentally responsible manner. This program relies heavily on the Master Gardener volunteers who I'd like to recognize tonight: Judy McCormick, Dave Kleppinger, Wendy Hamrick, and Doug Callery. In addition, in August of 2019, we presented Super Turf Saturday, which was a public educational event that provided over 100 attendees with sustainable lawn care advice from regional turf experts. Now, this is a new program the district is looking to try and get off the ground, the Shoreline Evaluation Program. Within the area, there are 152 miles of shoreline along the James, York, and Chickahominy rivers, with 138 miles of marshland and 14 miles of beach. Given that, the district has recognized the need for technical assistance for shorefront property owners to better manage their property to prevent water quality degradation. In a partnership with the Master Gardener Program again, the district is developing a shoreline evaluation program where participants will receive a shoreline assessment from a different district staff member or a Master Gardener volunteer, and that assessment will provide an identification of current potential shoreline issues, opportunities for improved management, and a final report with recommendations for further assistance if needed. Equine Conservation. In 2018, the Colonial District worked with JCC Stormwater and Resource Protection Division to conduct a survey of equine horse operations in 3 target watersheds: York River, Ware Creek, and Skimono Creek. The survey results indicated a need for further technical and educational assistance for equine conservation needs. The district recommended a change in the equine stocking rate for James City County Comprehensive Plan from 7 horses per acre, which is well above livestock industry standards, to 1 per acre, in line with industry BMPs. May or may not know, horses tend to eat the same food in the pasture all the time, and they have precision clippers on their teeth and lips, so they nibble it down to the ground level. That, in conjunction with their heavy weight and soil compaction in the pasture, basically denudes the pasture if you have too much going on. Horse management really involves a rotational pasture setting to give each pasture time to rest. We're proposing a phase 2 of this assessment to do the rest of the county and develop financial incentive program for equine conservation if and when funding becomes available. So in 2020, we received over $61,000 from James City County. That was for the technical assistance for the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act ordinance here in the county, the 20 agricultural land assessments the district does for that, supporting that ordinance, and administering and executing the turf flow program. I need to preface this next slide because it is a best case scenario. And we all know with COVID and some other issues, we're not in the best case right now. So like the county, the district does what it can with what it's given. But I'd like to present the 22 budget request. And as you can see, we want to really turn up the turf flow program, do a lot more with that, and get the Shoreline Evaluation program running and off the ground. Mike. So this is your contact information. Again, Bob Lund, who most of you know, has been doing this a long time. He's a wealth of knowledge. I'm still under a year at this, so I'm in learning mode, along with Jim Wallace and Robin. That concludes the presentation, if there are any questions.
Hey, thank you very much. Well, now I understand why they're a lot more popular than us. They give people money to comply with the Chesapeake Bay Act, and we get to tell homeowners you have to spend more money to comply with the Chesapeake Bay Act. No wonder everybody loves you.
I don't envy you, Dave.
This Shoreline Evaluation program, that sounds like a great idea. I remember years ago, the VIMS program provided a lot more assistance to the wetlands boards than they currently do. Do you know how you're going to interact with our wetlands program? Will we be referring people who come in for wetlands permits to them for technical assistance? Or any idea how that's going to work? Anybody?
Those are great questions, Mr. Gussman. Mr. Wallace and Ms. Small and I did have a conversation about that, a preliminary discussion, but those types of details would be worked out.
Is the Shoreline Erosion Advisory Service through DCR gone?
Not to my knowledge.
Yeah, sure, come on up.
Shoreline Erosion Advisory Service, SEAS, is still in effect. There's two guys who...
Excuse me, Jim. Could you just introduce yourself?
Please, pardon me. Thank you. I'm Jim Wallace. I'm the district manager of the Colonial Soil and Water Conservation District. Thank you,
Welcome.
Mike. Thank you. There are two staffers that run SEAS over in Tappahannock, and recently their service area has been broadened and now covers the entire state. So we have two individuals now that cover the entire state, as opposed to two that covered Eastern Virginia in the past. So in talking or trying to develop this shoreline program, we've talked with VIMS, we've talked with SEAS, we've talked with a lot of NGOs that are charitable and organizations. And so what seems to be missing is this educational component, third-party unbiased opinions about their shorelines and opportunities to provide more conservation within those shorelines or around those shorelines. So we were advised to check into a program that's being offered through the Master Gardeners up in the Northern Neck, and it's called the Shoreline Evaluation Program. And so we have fashioned our template right after theirs. And so what happens is the master gardeners go out and they give an evaluation of not only the shoreline, but the buffer area and the upland contributing area as well, which may include your lawn, your downspouts to your house, whatever it happens to be. So it's kind of the full package of that transition area from upland down to wetland. And so, with the new laws, with the governor's new laws about shoreline, living shorelines being the preferred stabilization practice, we felt like there was going to be a pretty hard press on local wetland boards, right? So maybe you all need some help. Well, if you all need help, you have people that you can call to. You have your staff, and you have VIMs, and you have Cs. I'm not really sure unless there's some money available, that VIMs and Cs are going to come to your aid right away. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But surely those folks are not going to be able to cover all of the requests that come from the homeowners. And so that's where we feel like we have a good relationship with the master gardeners. We have a template in Turf Love, so this shoreline evaluation program is going to operate just like on the template of Turf Love. And so we feel like in terms of voluntary conservation programs and efforts, it's right in our wheelhouse. So that's kind of the 30,000-foot view.
Thanks. It's unbelievable. It's like we're not having increased erosion with rising sea level. The problems are getting worse. We're seeing places flooding and eroding that we never saw before. It's very obvious in the county from when I started this board, on the Wetlands Board. Places are having erosion problems that we didn't see before. And there's 2 people in the state in the SEAS program. So your shoreline evaluation program sounds like a great idea. When a citizen comes in, wants to protect their shoreline, yes, they're protecting their property, but every foot of shoreline that erodes, that is a tremendous amount of nutrients going into the bay. And the impacts on water quality are affecting everyone. So it sounds like a great project, and I hope the Wetlands Board will be able to work closely with you. Thank you very much for coming out. We do have 2 more items under board considerations. The 2021 calendar. Does anyone have any problems with the calendar? Okay, I move to approve the calendar as it's presented to us. Can we have a vote on that, please?
Mr. Roadley? Yes. Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Our next order of business are the election of officers. Are there any nominations?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to nominate you for chairman again, if you're so inclined.
I would be happy to serve for another term.
All right, Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Okay, that motion carries. Let's see. The next officer would be the vice chair. Would anyone like to volunteer to serve as vice chair?
Mr. Dunn?
Mr. Dunn, how about it?
I'd be honored.
Thank you.
Okay, we nominate Mr. Dunn for vice chair. Can we have a roll call?
Mr. Roadley? Yes. Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Ms. Foreman, you're the secretary for this board, right?
No, Mr. Wilson is.
Oh, it is Mr. Wilson? Mm-hmm. Okay. I nominate Mr. Wilson to be secretary again. Is that okay with you, Mike? Thank you. Okay, can we have a vote, please?
Mr. Roadley? Yes. Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Guessman?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you, Mike. Can we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, we are adjourned.